Welcome to class. This is Introduction to Political Ideas, and I'm Ken Hicks. We began our discussion of radical Islam in the closing out our last discussion. We're going to continue talking about the historical, theological, and political wellsprings of radicalized interpretations of Islam. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to continue our kind of short history. Again, the history of Islam could take up many courses. It's a very long and venerable religion. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of the origin point of radicalized Islam. So we have to begin by recognizing that Islam, in contrast to Christianity and Judaism, as among those kinds of religions of the book that we often talk about, that Islam was a conquering religion. So Judaism and Christianity, to some extent, you could make the argument that Judaism has a martial past at various points. That it's one of the the reasons for the diaspora was the sort of the refusal to submit to Roman rule. Christianity likewise emerged from Judaism, was a persecuted sect within the Roman Empire for quite some time, and then actually quite suddenly became the religion of the Holy Roman Empire. Islam is much more of a political and a militarized religion. The Umayyad, Muslim conquest of Spain in the 500 years of Muslim domination of the Iberian Peninsula, kind of set that connection point between Europe and the Islamic world. That and the Crusades are two of the main reasons why Europe began to break out of the Dark Ages as new information, as trade began taking place between the Islamic world and the Christian world. It began adding new sources of information, new kinds of new reasons to trade. And so Spain was an important point of commerce and cultural exchange in those early years, following the death of Muhammad and the expansion of Islam. And so when you look, at what was the Islamic world in the first couple of centuries, the first thing you note is that there is a rupture within the Islamic faith, probably about 80 years in, or maybe a little bit less. It's not the same as the rupture that emerged, the first schism within Christianity between Eastern Orthodox and what would become the Catholic Church. First and foremost, the conflict revolves around the role of what in the Islamic world would be the caliph. And in Arabic, the name for a king is Malik. Under Islam, the term caliph means successor or steward, and referred to the successor of the messenger of God. And so from the death of Muhammad till around the 11th century, there were actually four fairly distinct caliphates in which distinctive factions of Muslims held power within the Muslim world. The first was the Rashidun Caliphate, which was largely comprised of members of Muhammad's immediate tribal group, the Quraysh. The first successor to Muhammad was Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's closest advisor and father-in-law. In fact, they were actually contemporaries. The division between Sunnis and Shiites emerged in this area with Ali ibn Ali Talib, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. He claimed direct lineage, and in fact the Shia believe that he was the legitimate heir. Ultimately, he would swear allegiance to Abu Bakr and eventually became the fourth caliph, but was later assassinated. And Ali is viewed by Shia Muslims as the last legitimate caliph, which marks again this dividing line between Sunni and Shia interpretations of Islam. So after Muhammad and Abu Bakr, every one of the Rashidun caliphs met the same fate of being assassinated by discontented rival factions. So the Shia basically talk about this idea of the last Mahdi, and that there will be kind of a Christ-like figure who will come at some later date, and the Sunnis do not adhere to that view. So Sunnis view caliphs as more like political executives, and the succeeding caliphate after the Rashidids was the Umayyads, which again lasted about 90 years, whose progenitor was from an Arab clan within the Quraysh tribe, and which would rule the Islamic world for 89 years and effect the conquest of Spain. Following the Umayyad Caliphate were the Abbasid caliphates, and they would rule for close to 500 years. This would be sort of the golden age of Islamic civilization, as they were incredibly innovative in this period. Mathematics, lots of kind of scientific and philosophical discoveries in this period. And again, part of the distinction between Sunnis and Shiites is that the Sunnis accepted that this was a political position. The Shiites have infused a great deal more religious and spiritual significance within those folks who are supposed to be caliphs. The Sunnis are by far the majority of Muslims. Some estimate that as many as 85% of Muslims are of the Sunni variety. However, Shiites are a majority in several countries, including Iran, Iraq, and Bahrain. And they are also a significant minority in Yemen and several other countries. So their presence in a variety of different kind of major countries is again a source of civilizational conflict. A great deal of the conflict within the Middle East is between Iran, which is a Shia-dominated state, and Saudi Arabia, which of course is sort of the seat of the Islamic religion, where many of the most holy sites, Mecca and Medina, are to be found, and where again there's a ton of oil. So these are, again, this reflects the idea that within the Islamic faith, it doesn't make sense to just call all Muslims alike. They have significant differences. I could have added another slide that talks about different subsettings within Islam. That there are there are a number of different sects. The Salafis are one. Wahhabism is sort of an interpretation of fundamentalist interpretation of the Sunni sect. So there are some even fusion sects that I could talk about. But you're trying to. I don't want to necessarily get lost in the forest for looking at all the different trees. Another very important question regarding Islam is the meaning of jihad. We all know what jihad means, or we all think we know what jihad means. In practical terms, all Muslims believe that the sincere practice of Islam requires jihad, which is the struggle against evil. Most Muslims believe that individual Muslims' greatest responsibility is to the greater jihad, which is that personal struggle to overcome temptation and sin. Within the Islamic faith, the lesser jihad is that outward struggle against unbelievers and the enemies of Islam. Adherents of radicalized Islam tend to emphasize the lesser jihad, a more politicized version of jihad or holy war. But it is important to keep in mind that Islam is a way of life. It's far more comprehensive in terms of the advice it gives to individual adherents. There is no church-state distinction within Islam. There was an attempt at secularization, which we'll talk about in a minute, that has ultimately not come to pass. The idea of Sharia, which is Islamic law derived from the Quran and the Sunnah, which are the kind of the tales that built around the making of the Quran, is the legal foundation for this political order, which in many instances manifests itself as a kind of theocracy. Radical Islamists, are theocrats. They advocate strict enforcement of Sharia law in the form of a theocracy. One of the founding kinds of members of modern Islam, or political Islam, if you will, is Abdul Allah Maududi, who died in 1979. And he was a founding member of the Society of Islam, a very important member in terms of the emergence of Pakistan as a separate nation. Within Islam, as we turn into the 20th century, there was a strong movement towards secularization. This was largely brought about by the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of modern Turkey. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was the leader of Turkey until his death in 1938. And he was determined to modernize Turkey. And for Ataturk, that meant, basically the move to liberalize and to secularize the Turkish, Islamic society. You also had kind of a parallel movement called Baathism, which was a blend of Arab pan-nationalism and socialism, it kind of took place in both Syria and Iraq and Egypt. And it was an attempt to try and again create a kind of Arab nation. Baathism, in fact, Saddam Hussein of Iraq was a Baathist. Everyone in Iraq who held political, positions of political authority were members of the Baath Party. Liberalizing and modernizing projects by Muslim regimes in this period really contributed to what I think may fairly be characterized as a reactionary religious movement among conservative Muslims, really beginning in the early part of the 20th century and persisting to this day. Islam has also been politicized and antagonized by a variety of external threats. The first, of course, being the Crusades, which began in 1095 with Pope Urban II, responding to the appeal of the Holy Roman Emperor for help in recovering Jerusalem. The goal of retaking the Holy Lands for Christendom galvanized European, feudal classes. Hundreds of thousands of European nobility went to the Holy Land and fought in the Crusades. A much smaller number of them returned safely. Many of those folks stayed in the Holy Lands and formed, the Crusader states in that period. Estimates of upwards of 1 million Europeans and Muslims died over the more than 2 centuries of essentially religious warfare in this period. And so nobody should be shocked that, that when modern day Islamists, radicalized Islamists describe Europeans as crusaders, that has a different meaning for people in the Levant and for Arabs in the Middle East than it does for Europeans. The war was very close to home for those folks, even though it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. You also had, of course, European colonization. And political domination of Muslim lands. Most of the Middle East was divided between England and France. France, for a very long time, controlled what is known as the Levant, which is Syria and Jordan and Palestine. Whereas England, and they also controlled large portions of northern Africa. England controlled many of the what we might call Muslim portions of Africa. They ultimately would take over for France in parts of the Levant as well. And so, for Muslim peoples, for people of the Islamic faith, this period of colonization was a period of humiliation. And a great deal of it, I mean, we talk about colonization. We don't often talk about the use of coercion and violent force in holding on to those territories. And violence was a common tool that colonizing powers used to control, again, much larger populations. A last kind of external, well, not really the last one, but an important source of the contemporary external threat was the declaration of a Jewish state in 1948. The declaration, in fact, the state of Israel is a function of what we might call the Zionist project. And Zionism is basically the argument that Jews can never be safe unless they have a country of their own. Zionism emerged in Europe. It's a late 19th century movement, if my history is reliable. And it really intensified, of course, as a result. But again, colonization began within what is now Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th century, where Jews from Europe were moving and buying property within Palestine when it was still part of the Ottoman Empire. That intensified after World War I with the Balfour Declaration, and of course the Holocaust during World War II. Rendered that need, that perceived need for a Jewish state even more, imperative for people of the Jewish faith. And so, of course, at the end of World War II, Palestine was part of the British mandate, the lands that were being governed by Britain in this period. And in fact, there were several Israeli groups that conducted terrorist operations to basically hasten England leaving Palestine, and ultimately they were successful. There were groups called the Stern. One was called the Stern Gang. They blew up the King David Hotel. They killed 500 British soldiers and officers in that hotel, and they really kind of hastened England leaving Palestine, and that's a source of that's a sore spot with many British folks as well, and it's one of the reasons why British intelligence really doesn't work, or it hasn't until very recently, has not been inclined to work closely with Israeli intelligence services, and so. A Jewish state on land considered to be holy by Muslims is, again, viewed as at once an insult and an injury. Certainly among the Palestinian people, it is much more closely felt because they were displaced. They were literally kicked out. When the British left, they divided, they partitioned the country into as Israeli and Palestinian lands. And Israelis had more weapons at the start of this period. When the British left, they basically kicked people out. They kicked hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of what would have been their land and what had been their land for centuries. Part of the reason why Gaza is the most densely populated place in the world is what is known as the Nakba, where what was the nascent IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, came up to whole villages and with machine guns and basically said, "You have an hour, get your things and get out," and literally herded them over into Gaza. And so this is a sore point with Muslims, and it has been rendered even more. Even more salt has been rubbed in the wounds by the series of uninterrupted Israeli victories, military victories over their Arab, neighbors, including the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, the Suez Crisis of 1956, which is a complicated thing, where The British and the French and the Israelis were trying to take over control of the Suez Canal to prevent Egypt from seizing control of it. This was one of the last points where the United States actually acted as an honest broker and actually said to the triumvirate of powers, you're going to stop this right now. That was actually a period too, I believe, where an American gunboat was repeatedly attacked by Israeli, airplanes. You also had, of course, the Six-Day War of 1967, where Israel seized the Golan Heights from Syria. And then, of course, you get the Yom Kippur War, which was a surprise attack and which was probably the closest that Israel came to suffering a military defeat, where they basically fought off sustained attacks by Syria and especially Egypt. And at various times, Israel has militarily occupied and or invaded Gaza, the West Bank, and southern Lebanon. The October 7th attacks by Hamas from Gaza again provoked the latest sustained warfare between Israel and Palestine, and I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. Another important external threat is, the threat posed by Western ideas, liberalism, secularism, materialism, sexual equality. These are viewed as direct affronts by most, conservative Muslims. They view, shows like Baywatch. Of course, I'm dating, but that's dating myself. But that was an important kind of cultural event where most Muslims thought that those kinds of shows were horrific. They don't like blue jeans. They don't like American music. They view Western cultural imports as decadent. And they fear that such ideas are infectious, that young Muslims will, especially young Muslim men, will take on Western attitudes, and that will have a deleterious effect on their religious well-being. And it's important to keep in mind that Islam is a very communitarian religion, and by communitarian I mean the practice of religion is practiced communally. They feel a strong sense in which they are their neighbor's keeper. They feel, especially again among religious members of those communities, that keeping up appearances is enormously important. That following, the cultural and religious traditions of the specific communities practicing Islam is very important. This is one of the reasons why honor killings is particularly problematic in many, many Muslim countries. I was going to say in many Arab Muslims, but it's spreading. This has happened where you've had situations where a Muslim man will propose marriage to a woman, and if she refuses, they will engage in acid attacks, throw acid in the woman's face to disfigure her, so that she would be be unattractive to any other male. Which again, to me, is symptomatic of a strong sense of misogyny within the cultures practicing Islam. I am not saying that all Muslims are misogynists. I am saying that these kinds of specific events are indicative of a problem within those communities, just as there are problems within American communities of intergender violence. One important event that really kind of highlights the rising tensions within the Muslim world and between Muslims and the West is the Iranian Revolution of 1979, where a pro-Western regime led by the Shah, which was a kind of king, Iran, in Iranian or Persian, the Shah meant sort of a kind of royal figure, and the overthrow of that regime by Ayatollah Khomeini. And Ayatollah in Islam is a high-ranking religious figure. Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Iran and began, establishing a theocracy in Iran. That had many destabilizing effects on U.S. foreign policy, and Jimmy Carter was president at the time. And he very quickly enunciated what became known as the Carter Doctrine, which was to say that the U.S. would use military force to maintain access to the Persian Gulf. And again, the reason for that is the Persian Gulf is one of the main export points for oil from the Middle East. And so bottlenecking the Persian Gulf would have had destabilizing effects on the global economy. And so the United States was taking a leadership position in basically saying, we are going to ensure that we can maintain the flow of oil globally so that it does not upset the economies of those countries reliant on Middle Eastern oil. And so to that effect, we dramatically increased our military presence in the Middle East. We converted several islands in the Indian Ocean basically into depot points where we could bring in very large configurations of naval power so that we could very quickly project power into the Middle East. We began leasing, Gulf, installations so that our naval vessels could be resupplied and refit within many of those countries. And so this significantly increased what we might call the footprint of the U.S. military and subsequently of U.S. culture in the region. The greater presence of American military might and of American culture became a dramatically increased tension point, between Muslims and the West in this period. So let's talk a little bit about radical Islam. And again, this is the combination of ideas, concepts, and we're going to spend most of this presentation talking about specific historical events that would give rise to radical Islam. So radicalized or politicized Islam is, amounts to a kind of culture, a Muslim counter-enlightenment. It's an amalgam of various strands of Islamic thought and culture. Just as the European counter-enlightenment rejected Enlightenment assumptions, radical Islam represents a rejection of attempts to westernize or modernize what we might describe, or what they might describe, as Dar al-Islam, the Arabic word for the house of Islam, where Muslims are the dominant majority and where Muslims can freely practice their faith. One of the key events in the emergence of radicalized Islam was the formation of the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, this was formed in part in reaction to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And keep in mind, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the declaration of the Republic of Turkey, for many conservative Muslims, that was a devastating, traumatic event. That effectively meant that they were no longer being governed by people who shared their religious beliefs, that now we had nation states and specific groups of political elites, many of whom conservative Muslims did not trust because they had already gotten into bed with European powers or America. And so the Muslim Brotherhood emerged in Egypt. In part, it was driven by deep opposition to British control of the Suez Canal. The person who formed the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, basically lived in the town that was proximate to one of the main areas of the Suez Canal. And if you don't know anything about the Suez Canal, it is a tremendously economically and militarily consequential waterway. It basically connects the Mediterranean with the Red Sea, and it is considered to be critical for the movement of goods from Asia into northern Africa and Europe. And so whoever controls that canal potentially wields enormous political authority. And at the time, Britain, it had been finished in the 1850s, I believe, and Britain basically controlled the Suez Canal. And this guy, Hassan al-Banna, who was a teacher in the village or the town close by, interacted a great deal with Arab workers who felt like they were being mistreated and treated disrespectfully by the British. And so al-Banna basically conceived a sort of all-encompassing ideology calling for the Islamification of a modern state. This is where you get the beginnings of what we might call pan-Islamic or at least pan-Arabic ideologies, that basically calling for a nation that encompassed all Arab-speaking peoples. It was also, again, there was a cultural element, as there would always be with Islamic political ideologies, that was deeply critical of materialism and British imperialism. By the 1940s, the organization had over 500,000 members. Al-Banna was assassinated by the Egyptian king in 1949, and that was again one of the destabilizing events in Egypt that caused a great deal of political ferment in that period. One of the most significant kind of theorists of modern day radical Islam was the guy pictured on this slide with the Nazi mustache. His name is Sayyid Qutb, or Qutb. He was a teacher, novelist, and journalist. He was a prolific writer. He was a bachelor because he said he could never find a woman who was sufficiently virtuous for him. And so he lived a life of a bachelor, which meant he had plenty of time for writing. He was a teacher. For a time, he held a position in the Ministry of Education in the regime of King Farouk. But he became increasingly strident in his criticism of the secularism and the Western-friendly attitudes of that monarch, who sent him to the United States for 2 years. Basically said, go to the United States and learn about it. And I think that Farouk believed that sending Qutb to the United States would somehow kind of loosen him up and cause him to kind of instinctively see the virtues of living in a modern society. He spent his time, I want to say he was in Colorado, and I want to say it's where Colorado State is, but I could be wrong. I mean, he wasn't living in Denver. He was living in, kind of a small, kind of bucolic community, but it was a college town. And he earned a master's degree there. And the minute he got back, he began writing about how horrified he was at just, what a group just how decadent American society was. So when he came home, he joined the Muslim Brotherhood. Initially, he was a strong supporter of the officers' coup, which overthrew King Farouk and was led by Lieutenant Colonel Gamal Abdul Nasser. However, he quickly became discontented with them because, again, the folks who overthrew the king were modern Westernizers. And so he began plotting to overthrow that regime. He was jailed on one occasion and kind of released, and then he was caught plotting the overthrow again, jailed again, and that time he was executed. And so he wrote extensively, voluminously about his arguments for radicalized, more radicalized version of Islam. And I think if we delve more deeply into how he looked at things, you'll get the sense of kind of both the radical and the various implications, and how he may have drawn on some other ideologies in terms of looking for ideas as to how to Islamify the world, if you will. And so this is a selection from the introduction of his book, Signposts Along the Road, which was written in 1964. He basically declares at the start, humanity is on the edge of an abyss. The danger is not about the impending threat of complete annihilation. Remember, as he's writing this, in all likelihood, the Cuban Missile Crisis has been going on. For Qutb, the problem is the abyss is the lack of values which guide human life towards development and progress. He denounced democracy as unsuccessful to the point of sterility. By the same token, he denounced Marxism as a theory that failed because it conflicts with human nature and with human needs. And he basically said that humanity is in need of new leadership. The leadership of Western man is coming to an end because it fails to offer any more life-changing values. There is a need now for leadership that preserves and develops current material standards, but secondly, feeds humanity new values and ideals and a way of life that does not conflict with human nature. And for Qutb, Islam alone has the capacity to provide such a path and such values. And he cites the Quran 2:30. And when your sustainer said to the angels, I am going to make my representative on earth, it's a religious doctrine. He basically argued that all human-made ideologies had failed. The scientific revolution has already, succeeded, and he's writing this in 1964. Likewise, nationalist ideologies have run their course, and so for Qutb, all traditional man-made individualist as well as collectivist theories and systems have been doomed to fail, fated to fail, he would say, because the time for Islam and the Islamic nation has come. And he is basically making the argument that Islam and Islamic society has a divine task. You are the best community raised for the good of mankind. You enjoin what is good and forbid what is wrong, and you believe in God. This is again from the Quran. Thus we made you a middle community, so that you be witness for mankind, as the messenger is a witness for you. And so Qutb, kind of infers from his religious studies that the only way that Islam can be practiced fully is within a nation of believers. And so he laments the extinction of the Islamic nation, which was, again, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire, and calls for the need for a political community inspired by and living according to Islamic law. He says there is a need to revive that Muslim nation and bring it back from under the trash heap of man-made theories of generations. He also concedes, I am well aware that there is a huge distance between the attempt at a renaissance and the achievement of leadership. And so he basically says, we have to start somewhere. And so he says the first step is important. We have to recognize that material creativity is a necessary component for world leadership. We need to accept that people are not going to be, not going to willingly live within a system that deprives them of the material well-being that they currently live under. So he argues, as stated before, under certain conditions, creativity is considered a form of worship of God and a purpose of man's creation. So he basically argues, and this is an important, kind of concept within radical Islam, that the world exists within a state of jahiliyyah, which is the state of ignorance of God's guidance. Now, originally, under the Mohammedan, Quran, Jahiliyyah was that period prior to the revelations, Muhammad's, revelations from God. So Jahiliyyah is characterized today by an assault on God's authority and on a specific property, of the divine governance on earth. The consequence of such an assault on God's authority is an assault on his creatures. So you have the argument that the abuses of human rights in the communist world and the exploitation of individuals under capitalism is evidence of this dark age. And he argues that Islam, and again, he's writing this in the depths of the Cold War, right? Islam offers the only pathway to free people from worshiping one another in some form or another. He's basically contending that both under communism and under capitalism, what is happening is a form of idol worship. That we are either worshiping money or we are worshiping a dead idol in the form of Karl Marx. And so here's where you see he's borrowing from another ideology, and I'll ask the audience if they can remember which particular group of ideological beliefs tend to believe in the idea of a vanguard, right? We need a group of the faithful to plow through this vast ocean of Jahiliyyah, which has spread throughout all corners of the earth. But they must maintain their purity by isolating from this pervasive Jahiliyyah under some conditions while maintaining some ties in others. They have to recognize the extent to which, even in this dark age, there are certain things that we might need to retain. As such, the vanguard needs signposts along the roads. And what are these signposts? These are guides that are derived entirely from the Quran and from the essential writings surrounding the Quran. And so that gives you a sense of the ideological wellspring from which radical Islam that we're dealing with today came from. Let's continue looking at some of these key conceptual elements. Again, one belief that is very common among radical Islamists is that what we're dealing with is a post-colonialist conspiracy theory. Among more radical Muslims, there is a belief that their problems are the result of a conspiracy by Christians and Jews to corrupt the morals of Muslims. For Qutb, humanity today is living in a large brothel. Like many Christian nationalists, radical Islamists see no distinction between religion and politics. What Westerners tolerate as entertainment, Qutb and conservative Muslims view as a deliberate attempt to corrupt young Muslims. So these ideas began really kind of germinating in the 1960s, and alongside it, you get the emergence of increasingly militant interpretations of those kinds of ideas. Again, the declaration of Israel as a Jewish state came at a high cost to specific Palestinians, people like Yasser Arafat, he was born in 1929. He was from a well-to-do family. Palestinians were among the best educated and affluent of Arab peoples prior to the declaration of the State of Israel. And so, Arafat, shortly after the formation of the State of Israel, began organizing Fedayeen. Fedayeen are holy warriors who led violent guerrilla campaigns against the State of Israel from the founding of his group, which was called Fatah, but also the Palestine Liberation Organization, until the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords in 1994. And he was the president of the Palestinian Authority from 94 until his death in 2004. And so Israel and the fact that nobody can defeat Israel really feeds a great deal of militancy, and you get the emergence of groups like the Palestine Liberation Organization. This becomes part of the milieu of anti-colonialist violence of the 1960s. Of course, in 1972, the Black September terrorist incident during the Munich Olympics is a major kind of horrific point. Where members of this terrorist organization seized the Olympic Village, killed a number of Israeli athletes, attempted to hijack a plane, were ultimately killed by German special forces, many of them. So you also get, again, as this is happening, you have long-standing control of most portions of Palestine, of the West Bank and Gaza, are militarily occupied by the IDF in this period. This eventually becomes so intolerable for Palestinians that they launch what became known as the First Intifada, which Intifada is an Arabic word for uprising. It refers typically to a civilian uprising against oppression. The First Intifada was launched in 1987, which was sort of the year that Hamas emerges as a political organization. It lasted for 6 years until the Oslo Peace Accords led to the IDF's withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened regarding Gaza and why Gaza became such a tinderbox in a minute. The founder of Hamas was a quadriplegic, a guy named Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. He was involved in the formation of the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was jailed numerous times for organizing militant activities. He led Hamas from the First Intifada until his assassination by the IDF in 2004. He would be one of many Hamas leaders that the IDF would kill as a way of, again, disrupting, Hamas activities. Hamas's charter refuses to acknowledge the State of Israel. According to Sharia law, it declares all of Palestine as waqf, which is a trust granted by God to Muslims in perpetuity. The only solution to the Palestinian problems is jihad. The equation of Zionism with Jewish Nazism is a penchant of many of the more extreme Palestinian Muslims, and there is a penchant within this movement and many other movements in the Middle East for conspiracy theories. Hamas ideology links the creation of Israel to the Crusades, the Mongol invasions of the Muslim lands, the British imperialism of the 20th century. Hamas has blamed Zionists for causing the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, World Wars I and II, and Western imperialism, and repeatedly employ anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and draw on propaganda like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which again was something that we've discussed in a previous class. Again, to attack the State of Israel at various points. Hamas leaders have said, we're not at war with Jews, we're at war with Zionism. But again, that reflects also a deeper challenge. The whole chant from the river to the sea, most Jews view as deeply anti-Semitic, whereas most Palestinians view it as a fulfillment of their ideological beliefs, that one day they would live in a land where they are free to worship. I'm not saying these things to take sides. I'm just saying this is how the different sides tend to perceive these things. And this has driven a lot of our politics, our contemporary politics, because a lot of the campus protests that occurred, following the October 7th attacks, or the October 6th attacks, which we'll talk about in a minute, these are urban campuses where there are, in fact, large numbers of Jews and large numbers of Muslims. And that is, again, that is part of the challenge that we confront, because these points of contact become points of contention. And how we manage the arguments is very important. So, in the 1980s, Hamas really displaced the PLO, in large part because the PLO and Fatah under Yasser Arafat were moderating. Hamas was not moderating, and that was something, the problem that most Palestinians feel is that they are being confronted with injustice. They don't want to moderate, they want justice for them. If you look at the slide, this is a picture of the fence that basically surrounds Gaza. Part of the Oslo Peace Accords was that Israel built this enormous security barrier around around the Gaza, which is a fairly small area, roughly 30 square miles. And they basically penned these folks in. It was, it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Israel used its control of naval access and all points of entry basically to choke off a lot of supply and aid. People were not getting by. They were not thriving in this circumstance. And so, 20 years later, bad things happened. And I'm not in any way trying to diminish what happened on October 7th. But the result was they used they really were not that technologically sophisticated. They used tractors to plow through the fences. They used excavation, and they basically just blasted a couple of corridors and came through on motorcycles, bikes, whatever, and they were just killing people. They just murdered and wanton. They were not killing IDF people that much. They were not confronting IDF people. They were attacking villages, and they were grabbing hostages. They killed 1,200 people in a few hours, and then withdrew with over 240 hostages. This was the largest loss of life in Israeli history in its 75-year history. And it raises the question of what was the IDF doing, and it was a holiday. There were not sufficient people manning those observation points, and there certainly was not. I mean, the reaction by the IDF was slow. Some would say criminally slow, and so that it presented serious questions that have still not really been investigated in a sustained way. And so this remains, there are a lot of Israelis that want to have an investigation of what the Netanyahu government was doing, the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, what they were doing, what facilitated the breakdowns that enabled Hamas to exploit and to wreak such havoc in such a short period of time. And some would make the argument that the Israeli government, which is comprised of right-wingers, that many folks in Israeli defense and intelligence communities don't feel much of an affinity for, that kind of cultural distance between those between the political Israeli political institutions and the military and intelligence institutions helped kind of slow things down a little bit. But again, you have to investigate. So there are continued calls for jihad. Groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram continue to act as kind of radicalized forces. They continue carrying out attacks against those Muslims who have betrayed the faith. One of the earliest ones was the assassination of Anwar Sadat, who succeeded Jamal Nasser in Egypt. They assassinated him in 1981. The continued opposition to secular rule of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. One of the reasons why Saudi Arabia is so conservative religiously is to forestall those kinds of reactionary attacks. Reactionary or radical Islamists have also directed attacks on the West. In 1996, you had the Khobar Towers attack on American military assets in Saudi Arabia in 1996. In 1998, you had the embassy bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. In 2000, you had the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. And then, of course, you had the 9/11 attacks of 2001 on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and subsequent attacks that took place in France, Egypt, Indonesia, London, Madrid, Spain, and elsewhere. Let's talk briefly about the birth of Hezbollah, which is another kind of major radical Islamist group. This was driven by, in the 1980s, the presence of a multinational peacekeeping operation during one of Lebanon's, long periods of civil war. This was largely a U.S. and French-led mission. It was part of the problem with the peacekeeping mission was that the Reagan administration sort of gave direction to the military forces to be protective of the Christian communities in Lebanon. That led the Muslim communities of Lebanon to perceive that the peacekeepers were putting their thumb on the scale in favor of Christians. Hezbollah, the party of God, had been formed the year prior, and it was Hezbollah that basically committed one of the first acts of sort of a mass suicide bombing. They drove a truck that was packed with TNT into a U.S. barracks area and blew it up. They killed 307 peacekeepers. I wanted to say it was around 240 U.S. personnel and another 70 or so French paratroopers. This was sort of a formative event in the emergence of Hezbollah, and again, it's distinct from Hamas, both geographically in that it is predominantly a Lebanese movement, but it is also, these are predominantly Shia Muslims, and Hezbollah was formed largely as a Lebanese movement. Now, in recent history, Hezbollah has frequently clashed with Israel. They have frequently acted in a supportive way with regard to Hamas. But for the most part, Hezbollah was directed in support of Syria's president, Hafez al-Assad, and helped keep him in power during the Syrian civil war. And so it's very important that, that when Hamas really began, being seriously attrited by the IDF, Hezbollah began attacking northern Israel, and that led Israel to attack Hezbollah. So the emergence of suicide bombers in this period is again, it's an indication of just how radicalized some Islamists are, that they feel like both suicide and terrorism are justified under these kinds of conditions. That attacking the greater good, that by promoting the greater good by attacking apostasy is somehow justified. Mainstream Muslims tend to view both terrorism and suicide as forbidden both by the Quran and the Hadith, which are the collected reports and words of the Prophet Muhammad. A third avenue for jihad has increasingly come in the form of the use of education, in the form of indoctrination. And these are the use of madrasas. These are privately funded, independently operated schools where people learn, basically all they're learning is how to memorize the Quran. People who memorize the Quran are considered to be that is a mark of high esteem if you are being judged by a group of clerics as having successfully memorized the Quran. And so in many instances, the folks who are running these madrasas are deeply anti-Western, deeply anti-Semitic folks who are in many instances illiterate, but for the fact that they can speak the Quran from memory. And so Saudi Arabia has been a major funder of fundamentalist Wahhabi Sufi teachings. And they have done so in many parts of Europe as well. Many radicalized European Muslims have come out of those madrasas. American and European intelligence agencies increasingly view these madrasas as as basically centers for indoctrination. And for people who want to see privatized, education, this is one of the things you get. This is how privatized education can turn sideways if you're not really being careful. Now, that doesn't mean that state-directed education, is somehow invulnerable to indoctrination as well. Many communist countries were overtly indoctrinating their people. It still occurs in some parts of the world. I don't believe, as someone who was a product of public education, I don't believe that I was indoctrinated into any particular set of beliefs. So the Western response to radical Islam has generally been, violent in nature, and some would argue that's how you handle this kind of stuff. Targeted killings of radical leaders has been routinely employed as a vehicle for disorganizing and disrupting the operations of radical Islamist groups. You have had the severe attrition of groups like both Hamas and Hezbollah as a result of IDF and Israeli intelligence operations in response to the 10/7 massacre. Hezbollah, a great deal of their leadership were killed or severely wounded in an operation where Israel was able to successfully get into production lines and plant small amounts of explosives in both pagers and walkie-talkies. At a given point in time, they sent out a message that detonated all those devices at the same time. And they killed hundreds of Hezbollah operatives and leaders as a result of that. It was incredibly disruptive. There have been a number of other notable assassinations that have taken place in recent years. In 2011, of course, the United States Special Forces launched an operation into Pakistan, which was an ally of the United States, into the town of Abbottabad, where we discovered, American intelligence discovered, that Osama bin Laden, the architect of the 9/11 attacks, had been hiding. And so 10 years after the 9/11 attacks, Osama bin Laden was killed. In 2022, another major al-Qaeda figure, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was basically a member of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And if you don't know, al-Qaeda was basically a combination of previously two separate groups. What we might call the Arab Afghans. These are the people who followed Osama bin Laden into Afghanistan when bin Laden was basically organizing and funding Fedayeen and Mujahideen attacks on the Soviet Union occupiers of Afghanistan. Those folks didn't, when the Soviet Union left, those folks didn't just put down their arms. They began going to other parts of the world, into Albania, to fight against people who were attacking Muslims in that country. They also found themselves in Somalia. The Black Hawk Down event occurred in no small part because Afghan Arabs came to Somalia, or came to wherever the Black Hawk. It was it Somalia? Well, they came there. They went into Africa, where the United States had a peacekeeping operation, and they taught these warlords how to operate surface-to-air missiles, which facilitated the shooting down of an American helicopter. You also, during the recent Israel-Gaza war, you had the IDF killing of Yahya Sinwar, and close to a dozen other Hamas leaders were killed in this period as well. Sinwar was widely believed to have conceived and planned the 10/7 2023 attack from Gaza. He was ultimately killed in a firefight with IDF forces. Let's talk briefly about the rise of ISIS. There were a number of historical precipitants, one of which, of course, was the Gulf War, where you had, again, a large presence of Americans. Again, I talked about the Carter Doctrine a little while ago. The proximate cause was the 2003 invasion and occupation of Iraq. And the policy of the United States occupation of what was known as de-Baathification. If you don't know anything about Iraq, it's situated right next to Iran. It is a majority Shiite state, but historically, the Sunnis in the northern part of the country had been the folks that had governed. They had been the political elites. There is also a large Kurdish presence that has again, oftentimes been agitating for independence. Most people who held political positions in Iraq were members of the Ba'ath Party. And the policy of the Bush administration that they adopted was called de-Baathification, where they basically said if you were ever a member of the Ba'ath Party, you can have no role, no future role in governance. Well, that basically disqualified most Sunnis from government and military positions. And that left them unemployed and very angry. And so, as a result of elections, the Iraqi Shiites came to power. They mismanaged, government. They worked out vengeance against Sunnis. And largely formed, governing coalition with the Kurds. And the Sunnis basically felt like they were being mistreated and were driven to take, military or militant measures. That gave rise to the Sunni uprising, which was, again, well-funded, well-led. And it also, led to the founding of ISIS, or it brought ISIS's leader into prominence and dramatically swelled the ranks of ISIS. It was led initially by a Jordanian by the name of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who, again, he was a Jordanian. He was a street thug in his youth. Apparently, after a relatively dissolute youth, he became he was called the Green Man because he had all these green tattoos all over him. He became a fedayeen of sorts. He operated a jihadist training camp in Afghanistan from 1999 to 2001. Then he went to the Sunni areas of Iraq and Syria. He was arrested a few times for militant activity. But he engaged, once the United States invaded and occupied Iraq, he engaged in spectacular and brutal acts of violence, including suicide bombings and hostage beheadings. He is said to have beheaded several people himself. He made himself sufficiently noxious that he was killed in a targeted airstrike by U.S. forces in 2006. His replacement on this slide was an obscure figure by the name of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who began specifically calling for a return to the caliphate, and who, following Zarqawi's death, kind of came to the fore in this group called ISIS, and called for the formation of a caliphate, and declared himself to be a caliph. And he was, again, occupying a power vacuum. Because, and again, in the aftermath of 2006, what had happened? That was the year of sort of the democracy movements. It was also a period of civil war in Syria. It was a period where the Sunnis in Iraq were at war with one another, and it created a large number of voids where there was basically no man's land in the Sunni-controlled areas of eastern Syria and western Iraq. And so that, provided a perfect ground for someone like al-Baghdadi to say, We are recrudescing the caliphate, and we are bringing, we're putting back the band, and we're gonna set up a caliphate. And that, again, brought large numbers of people to those areas, large numbers of Sunnis who were Sunni conservatives from Libya. One of the things we found out in Baghdad, in Benghazi, there were a large number of people living in Benghazi that went to those areas, those radicalized, that area that became known as ISIS, and they were drawn there by this claim that there would become an Islamic state of Iraq and Syria. I'm going to close on that note. When we come back, we will continue discussing Islamic radicalism, the key beliefs, and how sometimes the more you kill leaders, the more you end up metastasizing and radicalizing a group. We've discovered this with drug groups. If you kill or arrest the leaders, if you pull them out, sometimes those folks are actually the ones that are keeping things less violent. And so if you get rid of those folks, you end up with power struggles, you end up with people trying to prove how violent they can be. And that may be what we're looking at right now. Right now, both Hamas and Hezbollah have been severely damaged. The question is, what's going to happen when they get the breathing space to get their act back together? What are they going to do? Are they going to say, well, I guess we learned our lesson, we better not mess with Israel? Somehow I am skeptical that that's the lesson they're going to learn. Anyway, I'll close on that note, and I will see you, and we will continue our discussion of radical Islam next time.